The day I found out, everything was a lie. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who sits across from a divorce attorney, hands trembling, trying to explain how 30 years of her life quietly fell apart on a random Tuesday afternoon. But here I am. My name is Margaret Collins, and at 62 years old, I thought the hardest chapters of my life were already behind me. I had spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before retiring. Numbers never lied to me. People, it turned out, were a different story entirely. My husband, Robert, was everything I thought a partner should be. Steady, warm, predictable, in the best possible way. Wednesday mornings meant pancakes without being asked. Friday evenings meant old movies and chamomile tea. We had a rhythm, the kind you build so slowly over decades that you stop noticing. It exists until the day it shatters completely. The morning. Everything changed started like any other. Robert kissed my forehead before leaving for his gym session. He smelled like the same cedar cologne he had worn for 15 years. I watched his car pull out of our driveway from the kitchen window, coffee mug warming my palms, completely unaware that the version of my life I believed in was about to be permanently replaced by something I couldn't yet recognize. I had forgotten the reading glasses I needed for a client consultation I was helping a friend with part-time. Nothing dramatic, just a simple, forgettable errand that brought me back home at noon when I was supposed to be across town. I used my key quietly, thinking Robert might still be resting after the gym. The house felt the same as always, smelling like the lavender candles I burned every morning. But something in the air felt different, charged somehow, the way the atmosphere shifts right before a thunderstorm you didn't see in the forecast. I heard voices from the direction of the garden, low, intimate voices that didn't belong to a casual conversation. And when I moved toward the back window and looked out, I saw them, my husband, Robert, and standing beside him, leaning into him with a familiarity that made my stomach drop completely through the floor, was Angela, my daughter Sarah's husband, Daniel's younger sister. A woman who had sat at my Christmas table, a woman I had helped pick out a birthday gift for just 2 months earlier. I want to be honest with you right now, because this is the part where most people expect a dramatic explosion. Screaming, crying, throwing things. But I didn't do any of that. Something that had lived inside me for 3 decades, every instinct I had ever developed tracking financial fraud and quiet deception, clicked on like a light switch in a dark hallway. I backed away from the window. I walked to Robert's study, and I began to look, really look, at the life we had built together through the eyes of someone who finally understood that she had been a character in a story someone else was writing. That's when I found it, sitting on the edge of the side table near the armchair Robert always claimed as his reading spot. A small, amber bottle, clearly not something I had purchased, clearly not something belonging in our shared space. My mind cataloged it the way I had cataloged irregularities in financial statements for 30 years. Out of place, intentional, evidence of planning. I stood there for a moment, holding that bottle, and something inside me went very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after an enormous noise stops and your ears haven't caught up yet. I wasn't thinking about love in that moment. I was thinking about the fact that she had been here before, that this was not a spontaneous mistake, but a repeated, deliberate choice made again and again inside our home, inside the space I had built with my own hands and my own heart. I went to the garage. I found what I was looking for among my crafting supplies. A thick, clear bonding adhesive I had purchased months ago for a furniture repair project that I never quite got around to finishing. I returned to the study. I emptied the amber bottle carefully. I filled it with the adhesive, which was almost identical in its appearance and consistency. I placed it back exactly where I had found it. Then I slipped out of the house, sat in my car around the corner, and I waited. 45 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Robert, his voice stretched thin with panic, asking me to please come home immediately, saying something had happened, saying he needed help. I called for emergency services first, telling them calmly that I had received a distress call from my home address and that I was concerned. Then I drove back slowly, arriving just as the emergency vehicles were pulling onto our quiet street. The firefighters who responded were professionals. But even professionals have their limits when it comes to keeping straight faces in certain situations. The crew supervisor, a tall woman named Officer Brennan, pulled me aside later and could barely make eye contact as she explained what they had found and what had been required to remedy the situation. Robert and Angela were taken to the hospital. Robert's expression when he saw me standing calmly in the doorway of what had been our peaceful home was one I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not guilt, not remorse, just the pure, cold shock of a man who realized he had underestimated his wife completely. My daughter Sarah arrived within the hour. She was still in her work blouse, having rushed from her office after Angela called her, somehow omitting the majority of the relevant details. Sarah had always been perceptive, sharper than she let people see, and the moment she looked at my face and then at the emergency vehicles still parked outside, I watched her understand that the story she had been told was only a fraction of what had actually occurred. "Mom," she said carefully, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "tell me everything." So I did. Not dramatically, not with tears, though there were moments where I felt them pressing against the back of my throat like water behind a dam. I told her about the window, about what I had seen, about the bottle, about the 30 years I had spent believing in a version of my marriage that apparently only one of us was actually living. Sarah didn't say anything for a long time. She stared at the table between us, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She had stopped drinking. And then she looked up at me with eyes that were doing exactly the same calculations mine had done that afternoon, running backwards through every holiday, every family dinner, every moment she had accepted at face value. 3 days later, I received a visitor I had not expected. A well-dressed man from a financial advisory firm arrived at my door with paperwork that revealed something I had not known about my own life. Robert, it seemed, had quietly been speaking with financial advisors about restructuring his retirement assets in ways that would limit my access to them. He had been exploring options, planning ahead, building an exit he believed I wouldn't see coming. What Robert did not know, and had never thought to ask about, was the inheritance I had received from my grandmother's estate 4 years earlier. My grandmother, Evelyn, had been a woman who grew up with nothing and had spent her entire adult life turning nothing into something. She left everything to me. A trust worth just over $2.5 million, managed quietly and separately from everything Robert and I had built together. I had kept it private not from deception, but because it had always felt like hers, like something I was still learning to be worthy of. I had invested it conservatively, never touched the principal, and told no one. I called an attorney that same afternoon. Her name was Christine Park, and her reputation in our city was built on exactly the kind of cases that involved one spouse believing they held all the cards and discovering far too late that they did not. The divorce was final in 7 months. Robert received his personal belongings, his vehicle, and the contents of the joint checking account we had maintained for household expenses. Everything else was clearly documented as either separate property or subject to fault provisions given the circumstances. Angela disappeared from our family's orbit entirely and permanently. Sarah rebuilt slowly, the way strong people do, not by pretending nothing had happened, but by deciding clearly who she was going to be on the other side of it. Today, I live in a small house near the coast that I bought outright. My mornings begin with coffee on a porch that looks out over water that changes color depending on the light. I work part-time when I want to and travel when I feel like it. Sarah visits often, and we are closer now than we were before, bonded by the particular honesty that only comes after something has been broken open and you've both chosen to stay anyway. Robert and Angela were together for less than a year before the weight of what they had built on collapsed under them entirely. I was not surprised. Foundations made of deception have a structural weakness that eventually asserts itself, regardless of how solid everything looks from the outside. What I want you to understand, if you take nothing else away from this story, is that the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who has spent their entire career identifying hidden patterns is to assume they are too comfortable to look closely. I was not naive. I was trusting. Those are not the same thing. The version of me that walked back into that house on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon looking for her reading glasses was the last version of me who believed that kindness and patience were the same as blindness. The woman who walked out the other side of that year understood something much cleaner and much more permanent. Your worth is not determined by what someone else chooses to see in you. And the most complete form of peace is not the absence of betrayal. It is the absolute certainty that you know exactly who you are, regardless of what anyone else decided you were worth. They thought they knew the whole story. They were only ever reading the first chapter.